So Microsoft recently released the Surface Pro X, and I picked one of these up for my day job, and I've been using it for about 4 or 5 days. And I wanted to do a video comparing this to the trusty iPad Pro. And I really wanted to do this comparison for a couple of reasons, but one is I think the Surface Pro X here is probably the first real good competitor that Microsoft has put out to the iPad Pro. I think the Surface devices in the past have been closer to laptops, and I think they tried to put out an ARM Windows machine or Surface machine in the past, and it was awful. The Surface Pro X has got an ARM processor in it, which is going to look a lot more like a processor you get in an iPad or an iPhone. It's a mobile processor, and Microsoft's done some different things with Qualcomm to kind of create a processor that's just for this device. And what you get out of that is better battery life. Now, there's some issues with kind of app compatibility. We'll get into that in a little bit. And really just wanted to do a video here, just give you my thoughts on who I think the iPad Pro is great for, who I think the Surface is great for, and just give you guys hopefully a little bit of help in making a decision one way or the other. So let's dive in. So the first thing I wanted to jump into here is just design, and this is really where I think Microsoft has done such a good job over the past few years, kind of catching up to Apple. Of course, Apple's always been so focused on product design, but the Surface Pro X is excellent. It is I think a little bit thinner than the iPad Pro. I want to say it was close to about 6 millimeters thin, maybe a little bit less. So this thing is extremely thin. It's extremely light. I think the iPad Pro may be a little bit lighter, but still it's very light in the hands. It feels great. Microsoft's done such a good job of designing this to feel, I think from a balance perspective, I know this sounds weird, it's definitely a thing. From a balance perspective, this feels like a tablet. The corners are a little bit rounded, and I've got to be honest, I really prefer that over what Apple does with the iPad Pro, just kind of the sharper edges. I think it looks good. It does not feel as good in the hand. This feels very good in the hand when you use this as a tablet. Now, when you pop this thing open, this is really where you're going to start to notice just all of the new modern design elements that Microsoft has put into the Surface Pro X. So first, with the display, one of the knocks on the Surface for years has been the massive bezels, and really nice to see Microsoft finally get on board with a more modern design. Just about everybody else, from Apple to a lot of the PC manufacturers, are just getting rid of bezels these days. It's kind of the modern design trend. So nice to see Microsoft get on board here. And to be honest, I mean, this display looks fantastic. So with the slim bezels here on the side, I mean, these I believe are even smaller on the side than the iPad Pro. Yeah, so when you put these kind of next to each other, the bezels on the side of the Microsoft Surface Pro X are even thinner than the iPad. Now, there's still a little bit of a forehead and a chin on the Surface Pro X, but overall, a much better design with the screen makes us feel a lot more modern. Now, one of the things that the Surface line has had on the iPad for years now is the keyboard, and Microsoft continues the trend here. The keyboard on the Surface Pro X is just miles ahead of what you get on the iPad. Now, the only positive, I guess I could say, about the iPad Pro keyboard is, if you spill anything on this, you are not gonna have to worry about it because all the keycaps and everything are covered. The Surface Pro X, I imagine if you spill something on this keyboard, you're going to have some issues, but really, other than that, I mean, the keyboard on this thing is fantastic to type on compared to what you get on the iPad Pro. Now, of course, there's some pretty good third-party keyboard accessories with the iPad Pro. However, they really just bring a lot of chunkiness to the iPad Pro if you put on, I think Logitech makes a pretty good one, and you're like doubling the size of your iPad Pro. The keyboard that comes with the, well, I say comes with, that you have to buy separate for the Surface Pro X, I mean, it really keeps a slim profile and still provides a really good typing experience. So from a design perspective, I really like what Microsoft is doing. Now, I guess the last thing to point out design-wise, which is probably one of my favorite things about the Surface Pro X, is where they put the pen here. So if you just pop this thing down, the keyboard down, you have a nice spot here for the pen, and this thing will charge automatically, similar to what the iPad Pro does with the Apple Pencil. But I think that Microsoft has done such a good job of having a place for this pen just to rest when you're not using it. That's one of the things about the iPad Pro that still drives me nuts. Now, it's better than the older iPad Pro models, I guess iPad models, that have nowhere to put an Apple Pencil. Being able to magnetically attach it and charge is pretty good, but this thing still, the pencil falls off every single time I put this thing into a bag. And again, I love this aspect of the Surface Pro X. So Maybe in the future, Apple will do something as far as giving us a place to put the Apple Pencil when you're not using it. But again, kind of overall design-wise, I really prefer and have been impressed with what Microsoft's done with the Surface Pro X. Now, this is where the Surface Pro X experience kind of starts to fall apart a little bit, is once you dig into the software and app support and some of what the Surface Pro X offers. So because it's running that ARM processor, there's still a lot of Windows apps that aren't designed to run on that ARM processor. Now, this is going to completely come down to just what apps you need to run. So in my experience, using Office has been fine. That's really what I use during my day job most of the time. And then there's some other 32-bit versions of apps that run on ARM just fine. The only thing you're really gonna have trouble with are 64-bit apps that are designed for more Intel processors. Only those 32-bit Intel apps and the ARM compiled apps are going to work on this thing. Now for me, I've been able to get by just fine, but I know that there's a lot of people that have complained so far about this machine, and that's been the primary complaint, is having certain Windows apps that a lot of people need for their day job or need for whatever work that they do that don't run on this. Now, on the other hand, this is where the iPad absolutely shines. And if you've been using Apple products for a while, you know this. You know, the iPad has an absolutely wonderful developer community. There are a million apps to do just about whatever you want on this machine. So as far as app compatibility, I mean, this is where, you know, you might just go with an iPad just so you don't have to deal with that. Now, the next thing, I guess, is just to dig into the differences in the operating systems. Now, this is kind of that age-old debate with an iPad, is whether or not you can be productive and get work done on this. Now, again, this is fairly subjective here. I mean, it just depends on what you need to get done. So what I think the iPad is absolutely wonderful for is more creative work. If you are doing photography, you know, there's a lot of video editing you can do now, and then just some light work like email, you know, web browsing, all of those things is what I think the iPad is excellent for. And I use this every day for, you know, of course, consuming media and things like that. The iPad's always been good at, but I do a fair amount of email on the iPad. I do a pretty good bit of web browsing on that. And then I do a decent amount of writing on the iPad as well. I've got just an Apple keyboard that I kind of hook up to this just when I want to do a lot of writing. For everything else, for me, with my day job, again, I'm using Microsoft Office constantly. I'm doing a lot of file management. That's another thing that the iPad just hasn't quite caught up on. I mean, the Files app on here has gotten better, but it's still nowhere near just having a full-fledged operating system. Now, there's a lot of people out there in the Apple community that just flat out will not use Windows at the end of the day. And if that's you, I get that. I mean, Windows is one of those operating systems that at the end of the day is just not for a lot of people. Anyway, I hope this video has helped some of you guys just at least kind of see what Microsoft has to offer with the Surface Pro X, kind of compared to the iPad. And so that's going to do it for this one. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Later.